$20.5 million. That's a big number. It's the population of Mumbai. It's the average number of hot dogs sold each year at MLB baseball games. It's the number of pounds paid in bonuses to Barclays Capital Chiefs over the last 5 years. It's the number of Oreo biscuits that Americans consume in one day. It's also the average number of visitors to Thailand each year. And reportedly, it's the number of Americans who smoke marijuana each year. But it's also approximately the number of songs currently on Spotify. As we can see, the number of users using Spotify worldwide has grown rapidly over the last few years. In 2012, it was reportedly around 20 million users, but this was reported by Facebook, and according to Spotify, it was nearer 10 million users. That's a lot of songs. If each one was represented by a single CD case and piled one on top of the other, it would reach a height of 673,000 feet. If we assume that an average song on Spotify is around 6 minutes long, then George Washington would have had to start listening to Spotify in 1778 in order to listen to the entire catalogue by the present day. On average, somewhere around 15,000 songs are added to Spotify each day, which is around 90,000 minutes of music. And considering you only have 1,440 minutes in each of your days, the catalogue would grow faster than you could listen to it. At this rate of growth, our CD tower would reach the moon by the year 9029, if we're still making music by then, or if we haven't blown up the planet. This all seems quite spectacular, but how did it come about? And what does it mean for the music business? And what does it mean for artists? Throughout its history, recorded music has been a subject of great change. Over the last 50 years, we have witnessed the transition in music format, first from vinyl to cassette, and then to CD. During this period of time, a technological change has inferred an increase in total record sales. However, things started to change with the introduction of the MP3. For the first time, the record labels did not have control over the format which their music was distributed on, and piracy became significantly easier. It inferred a fall in the number of record sales. Being able to stream an unlimited number of songs for a small monthly fee represents a potentially huge shift in the way in which we listen to music. But it's a new business model which gives many artists and recording labels the willies, because of the way in which streaming services pay out royalties. This is probably the most controversial aspect of music streaming. Spotify has been frustratingly slow to release data on its users and its complex royalty system, and the opacity of the system has only added to their worry. As was reported last month, Adele's album 21 was finally made available for streaming on Spotify. At first, Adele's team wanted a premium-only deal, where free users of the service would not be able to stream the album, but Spotify did not agree to it. And the recent statistic showing that the artist's payoff on Spotify is 3 times greater for premium streams as compared to the free streams is most likely the reason why Adele's team wanted that premium-only deal. As you can see on the graph, artists are making 3 times the amount of money every time a premium user streams their songs compared to free users. But since Adele has already sold 22 million albums, she probably decided the difference wasn't that big a deal.
Buy a playlist versus a CD.
So there have been some complaints from artists that they make very little money off your service compared to what they make off the download service. You guys have talked about the value of artists, both here and elsewhere, how important artists are. You go around telling artists to make great music. Some of them seem to feel like you're not paying them enough. What's your answer to that?
So the answer really is that, again, this is a new model. It works entirely different than it's ever worked before. If you think about the old model, you used to buy a record, there was a transaction going on. If you think about that translating to iTunes, there was a transaction going on here. The difference with Spotify is you get paid every single time someone plays your song. And that's not the same amount as if someone buys it, but that adds up.
Considering these rates at ½ cent per stream of an individual song, it would take an artist 200 plays to earn $1, and therefore would take you 200 million free streams to earn $1 million in royalties.
$1 million.
These rates, however, are better for premium streams. However, considering artists already pay distribution services of $50 a year just to get their music on streaming services like Spotify, they would need 10,000 free streams just to break even. However, let's forget for the moment about how much Spotify pays out to artists and focus instead on the nature of those payouts. Let's wind the clock back 20 years. Recording artists had to convince you to fall for their music just for long enough to make you buy a CD. Since the inception of pop music as a physical format, this need to impress a music buyer for a short length of time gave record labels a big incentive to look for one-hit wonders, capable of moving product quickly. It also meant people bought a lot of really shoddy music. Granted, labels often put a considerable amount of effort into grooming those artists for a full career, because it's easier to sell music when fans already like the people making it, but each time the music was released, the purchase only had to happen once. The rise of the iPod and iTunes made it harder for labels to pack long-playing albums with subpar filler tracks. It also made it easier for music fans to fall for a hit single for the low prices of 99 cents. The landscape of the music industry is changing. Recorded music and its formats have always been very interdependent. Pop songs tend to be 3 minutes long because 50 years ago that's how much music could fit onto a side of vinyl. The compact disc is said to be 74 minutes long in order to handle Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Neil Young, amongst others, including Gene Simmons of Kiss, believe pop music sounds bad. And they're not the only ones. We can see Spotify and other similar streaming services as an opportunity. They could be the answer to the music industry's quality issues. As with almost anything, it's about finding a balance between quantity and quality. It's no longer enough to convince fans to buy a single disc once. Instead, artists and labels have to turn them into lifelong fans. CDs can be seen as a one-time purchase, because once you've bought them, you don't really need to buy them again. Streaming services, however, can be seen as an incentive to artists to create music of longer lasting value. The Beatles succeeded in doing this for generations. This should certainly come as welcome news to any music fan.
Express delivery.
Sales of recorded music have fallen off a cliff recently, and then declined immensely in the past 10 years. Arguably, the money is falling out of the music, and with it, perhaps the ability of artists to take a year out from touring to craft an album in a snazzy studio. But in the battle over what money is left, only the artists who convince people to listen to their music over long periods of time, the way in which the Beatles did, will come out ahead. Music is a business, and now, for perhaps the first time ever, the music business favours long-term quality over a flashy first impression. So, does Spotify have a future? Well, Sean Parker, a chief investor in Spotify, reckons that Spotify will be bigger than iTunes in less than 2 years.
Is he insane?
Well, it might seem kind of unrealistic, but let's do the math. Warner Brothers Music Group generated roughly $800 million from digital downloads in 2011, most of which would be from iTunes. So since WMG has roughly 20% market share, we can estimate for these purposes that iTunes has paid approximately $3.2 billion to record labels in 2011. So, assuming iTunes payouts stay constant, the industry is moving away from downloads and towards streaming. Spotify then would have to grow by over 30 times in 3 years to approach that amount. This might seem impossible, but revenue grew an incredible 458% from 2009 to 2010. And those 2010 numbers were from before Spotify entered the enormous and all-important US market, where it was received very well, and before Spotify integrated with Facebook, which supercharged its distribution. To generate $3.2 billion of subscription revenue to pay out to record labels, Spotify would need to have more than 35 million paying users. To put that into context, that's roughly about the population of Greater Tokyo in Japan. That's 35 million people willing to pay a yearly subscription for digital music. Spotify and Pandora are perhaps the most popular streaming services out there, and their revenue growth reflects the growing acceptance of streaming as opposed to owning musical content. Both companies reported revenues of well over $200 million in the past year. However, despite this, both companies are having trouble making a profit. Although both companies have different business models, the problem they are facing is basically the same: the high cost of music royalties. Unless Spotify and other streaming services can obtain more paying subscribers, the future of streaming services is under threat. Whether they are financially viable is still to be decided. These numbers show that the music industry might have to lower its demands if it doesn't want to risk losing the growing revenue from streaming royalties in its entirety.
You may kill me, but you may never insult me. Who am I? Captain Jack Sparrow.
Did we mention piracy?
Spotify claim that they are dedicated to eradicating piracy. By providing an accessible and cheap alternative to illegal downloads, they claim that streaming services like Spotify will cut the number of illegally downloaded songs, and in turn result in more royalties paid to their artists. Here's what Sean Parker, chief Spotify investor, has to say.
I believe is that you have to accept that the war on piracy is a failure. So you have to be willing to believe that, you look at the data, somewhere between 4 trillion and 10 trillion songs are illegally downloaded every year. And we're looking at maybe 4 billion or so legal downloads per year. So orders of magnitude more illegal downloading. So what's really happening is people are learning about music through their friends, and then they're going to the piracy networks and they're downloading it, or they're trading it on hard drives, or they're trading it, on private, private networks. So if you are willing to admit that, then you have to ask yourself the next question is, what are people willing to pay for? And I think the answer is convenience and accessibility.
So, what does streaming mean for the music industry? It's a very open-ended question. In 20 years' time, people could be saying, "Hey dude, remember that thing called streaming? Oh, far out." After all, look how quickly we've come from vinyl to streaming. As a consumer, streaming presents an incredible prospect. But as an artist, your ability to make a living from music is becoming questionable. Whether you're a consumer or an artist, the future of the music industry remains up to you.
How far are you going?
About 30 years.